Just go ahead and start with our live broadcasting with regards to Module 12. Christina and I are going to be just basically giving an analysis or commenting on the book with regards to the opportunity and the achievement gap. And so, Christina, why don't you start us in with this discussion?
Sure. First off, I was really glad that we picked the same book. I, read the required sections of the other one, but this was the one that I really focused in on and was interested in pursuing. So I'm glad we will have that common frame of reference.
Yes.
And just to kind of open, I thought that the quote that was towards the beginning of the book, I guess it was I guess it was chapter 1. And it said that it's on page 18, I believe. While I raise this question to my students, page 17. While I raise this question to my students, I take them back to the predicament that Abraham Lincoln faced before allowing blacks to enlist in the Union Army. And it said that we would be compelled to abandon the war. Sorry, no, that's not the quote. No nation can enslave a race of people for hundreds of years, set them free, braggled and penniless, pit them without the assistance in a hostile environment against privileged victimizers, and then reasonably expect the gap between the heirs of the two groups to narrow. I think that kind of opened up all, the entire kind of chapter, excuse my cat in the background, of just the entire book, I should say, on all of the different issues that are kind of raised of just the disenfranchisement and the gaps that have existed in education from as long as, going back to the Civil War, going back to, after slavery, and just they kind of go through different eras that our country has been through. And on one hand, I felt like at times I was kind of overwhelmed of like, well, then how can we even fix this? There are so many issues and there's so many, everything links to something else. There's never like a full, like, oh, well, if we would just do this, then it would all be solved. There was never like, oh, well, let's just fix housing and then it'll be solved. Let's just, focus on continuing the desegregation since a lot of our schools are still resegregating and that'll solve the problem. Let's fix healthcare. That'll solve. There was never like one thing that will kind of, or let's, increase teacher training and put, better teachers in our low income communities. And so, I like solutions. I like answers. I guess it goes back to our whole wicked problem idea that there isn't going to be one answer and it's never going to be solved per se, but we can make, gains and make improvement in it because there's a need. It's only getting worse at this point. Just one of the final things that I'll say, I did like that each chapter, to me, it seemed like they did offer with, well, what can we do? And I did like that they did offer some kind of, I guess, striving for some sort of, trying to create a solution, if not, even though it's not the solution. And one of the pages said that closing the opportunity gap by even just 1/3 would result in $50 billion of fiscal savings and $200 billion in savings from the societal perspective, decreasing incarceration rates and the amount of spending on different types of reform through that. And I thought that was huge, just not even completely eliminating the gap, but just reducing it by 1/3 would completely make a huge difference in our financial economy. So,
yes, absolutely. And speaking about the financial and the economic component, what was just kind of an eye opener for me was, seeing how districts and the education system actually determines their budget, their planning, for the various financial resources and the deficit, based on test results, based on scores, from the performance of these children. And the other thing that goes along with that is what I was able to see with regards to even in, with our politicians, the planning, there's consideration for more increased law enforcement, also connection with the prison system, also connection with the social service
Yeah.
system based on the performance results of these students.
Yes.
So it goes.
The prison pipeline.
Yes,
Mhm.
exactly, and it's really interesting with regards to the global effect, the extent, with regards to the strategic planning that goes on within these districts rather, and so when we look at all of that, we see the impact with regards to the inequities that goes on, within the school systems, and with regards to the effect that or the impact that it has on students of color. And this reading in this chapter really offers a lot of nuggets, with regards to things that we can do as leaders going forward to create changes within our system. One quote that I kind of highlighted, and this is on page 12,
Mhm.
the symbolic and cultural abasement that Americans of African descent endure is rooted in the material reality of living well below the national standard throughout the course of the US history. So this may not necessarily go with what I just said, but these are just some quotes that I just kind of highlighted. And, the other thing is that further on in this page, it talks about we must think about the opportunity gap against, this backdrop. The book talks about while the achievement gap and the opportunity gap may be connected, and really, it is connected. The goals are different,
Yes.
because it's one thing to achieve something, and you can have all this wealth of knowledge and you can have all this wealth of information, but then what about the opportunity? Is the opportunity there to encourage and to support and to extend, um, and to complement the achievement that one has garnered, that one has gotten? So, those were, kind of a few things that I was thinking about that as I was
Mhm.
reading this book. And the other thing I wanted to go back, since I spoke about the law enforcement, is that, the actual word or phrases that they use, drain in it, what it does is that the low achievement and the low test performance and the low academic performance and so forth, what it does, it puts a drain in the social service system. That's exactly what it says. And from what I see is that all of this becomes a trickling effect. Okay, so you've got a drain in the social service system, right? And
Mhm.
then increase in law enforcement and imprisonment. Okay, because we're talking about low reading scores. Okay, people that are not as educated, in such a way that they're able to make responsibly decisions to help guide their everyday interactions, their everyday decision makings.
Mhm.
So then what's going to happen is that you're going to see these deficits, and unfortunately, the plan is put in place. To me, a judgment call actually too, because the assumption is made. Okay, well, if individuals have they're performing very low or less than what they should be, all of a sudden we think about a judgment call and an analysis, an assumption that's made. Well, if this person doesn't have this intelligence level, or if they're not a high achiever, et cetera, so forth, then we could expect certain behaviors, or certain behaviors will likely follow as a result of the low performance. So that's just an eye opener. That's what I would have to say with regards to that.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I have quite a few different responses to some of the things you said. First, commenting on the law enforcement, a lot of that brought me back to, I don't know if you've seen the documentary 13th on Netflix, but just kind of, the systematic way that law enforcement and prisons have created a deficit in the African American community as far as taking away voting rights, because obviously, after being a criminal, your voting rights can be taken away. And so that created even more, inequities, because you're not able to have a say in what's happening in a lot of your government and local community. But then even when you went back, when you were talking about what was it? Oh, the test scores and results kind of making those decisions. It made me think about when they were talking about, how it turns into, when we looked into the whole standardized testing driving everything, and then it looks at those low performing schools that are often in low economic communities, they turn into kind of only basing their curriculum around how can we get the test scores better, and so they're only teaching a curriculum based on almost exactly word for word what these standardized tests are going to be teaching. And who's to say that these standardized tests, I mean, we often hear about in the schools that these standardized tests aren't even measuring skills that are always going to be practical and functional in everyday life. I don't use a lot of the things I learned in, high school in what my profession is today. So, teaching to the tests isn't going to be good. And then they talk about how, in our white schools and higher economic communities, they are still getting that curriculum teaching that's going to help them to do on the test when they were already set up as an advantage to do on the test in the first place. But then they're getting an enriched experience by getting these other types of field trips, and they're getting even the access to arts and being able to learn how to play an instrument, whereas these other schools almost don't feel like they can have time to teach these extra things, these cultural experiences, because they're so busy about trying to get that test better on the state test, that's coming up multiple times a year. And it ends up even furthering the deficit to not only this academic knowledge of reading, writing and math, then it's also a deficit in cultural experiences, in like learning about your other ethnicities, learning about music, learning about arts, which is so crucial to the whole child kind of perspective. So I think that's really important too. I'll stay with that for now, but I'll probably touch on some.
Yeah, I was going to just kind of interject on page 31, just a quote, and it may go along with the achievement and performance and so forth, where it talks about, in contrast to Title I, which did not disturb power relations between the races. It's so basically, it was actually looking at some different factors that would definitely support achievement. And so, I'll continue on with the quote. It sought to root out racial inequality by providing African American students with access to superior resources of the schools. So you're talking about, white schools versus, schools that are in, with regards to low socioeconomic status and not having the same opportunities, rather, where they're thinking about having to increase the test scores and so forth, versus, just encouraging and providing opportunities for these extracurricular type things that you were talking about. And so, here, this particular quote, it just says it sought to root out racial inequality by providing African American students with access to superior resources of the schools. So perhaps this is, when we're talking about solutions, this perhaps could be, with regards to the Title I factor that, in my opinion, kind of levels the playing field, so to speak, if that makes sense. Yes. And then further on, page 31, the accumulated experience of Title I versus desegregation. So this idea of, what will be more effective, what will have a greater impact and less problems, so to speak, with impacting that change. And what they also said further on page 32 is that although both programs continue to have a steadfast advocates both inside and out, and this with regards to our policymakers and lawmakers and so forth, Congress by the early 1980s, the logic that had motivated and sustained these policies had vanished, and few policymakers saw them as viable approaches to, here's what we're talking about, redistribution of educational or economic opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's, what the focus is redistributing, not just the economic, but also, increasing ways for, for people that are marginalized to have the same type of, or to have access to the same type of opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And, that your discussion of kind of resources took me to, it started actually way back in chapter 1, where they were kind of saying that resources isn't always the answer. You can throw resources at an impoverished school, with a lot of the Title I programs now, like that can help, and that can, it's not going to hurt necessarily, but it's not going to solve the issues just because you have, a new fancy textbook system or have all these things, or science kit. Just because it's there isn't going to automatically change anything around that situation. And again, with the opportunities, I thought about even the other book and just the chapters that I did read in that of, are the children who are coming here from another country and don't have legal status. They're given all these opportunities. They're able to be excelling in school all throughout until high school, and then adulthood hits, and those opportunities are gone because they were able to kind of access things through school, at least through that K through 12. But then you had all this, and now your opportunities are still gone because you don't have, that legal status. So I think they call that whole master status thing of, so you can throw resources, you throw all these things there, but then it's still about the opportunity, like you said, of like, what's really going to happen after that. And it also ties into the, in chapter 5, on page 66, I was really excited. It was the actual district that I work in was cited of Montgomery County. It wasn't necessarily like a hooray, but they did a study and looked at the benefits of integration and seeing how just attending a school that is integrated outweighs just the fact that a school that is considered impoverished has resources. So just because a school got a bunch of resources, it's still better for them to be in an integrated school. So
right.
It's a lot related to that resources and opportunity balance.
Yes, that's definitely, a good point. When you were talking earlier about, students that are from another country or immigrants, and, what I've thought about is that in the K through 12 setting, they've got all the various resources, but then, as you stated, as soon as they're done, they've graduated, it's like they're left out in this cold world, with not the same kinds of support, or perhaps none.
Yeah, I was going to say,
not at all. So they're left to kind of fend for themselves. So then, where is there a follow through? Could there be a follow through for those individuals? After they have completed the K through 12 school setting, to continue that support, to provide them with the resources so that they can have the kind of equal opportunity.
And I think we were on a good track of doing that with a lot of different legislation that was being passed under Obama. But as we all know, that is under attack right now. So I don't know about the follow through at this point. For a while, it was looking like there were going to be some more solutions. And
right.
But at this point in time, under the current administration, not so much.
The other thing, and I was trying to toggle through and find the page because I actually highlighted the online book. In terms of opportunities, the author spoke about the tracking, and then mentions with regards to the stereotypes that goes along with individuals of or students of color,
Yes.
That are kind of like in the pipeline to for receiving the gifted services, and I don't have the exact quote because I'm trying to find it.
I have something about tracking effects on page 14. I don't know if that would help.
Yeah, I think it was a little further on. But yeah, feel free to read that. But the other thing, what I was going to say with regards to the perception, also has to do with the teachers' perceptions, especially. Because when you refer somebody into the gifted program, usually it's in the elementary school level. And a lot of it has to do with teacher recommendations and so forth, and then you have cutoff scores and so forth. And while it is something that should be very objective, I do believe that there is a degree of subjectivity in there, and so to me, that is what I'm trying to get at. That would perhaps impact the opportunity for students of color or marginalized students.
Yeah. I do see on page 14, it says those students who are chosen early on for better classes in smaller learning communities have access to a wider range of resources, including teacher time and visits to college counselors. Their positive positioning allows them greater opportunities to form trusting relationships with adults in their schools. Those on the wrong side of tracking decisions must contend with larger classes, outdated materials, more competition for attention, and fewer adult advocates. Some students receive adult support and resources, others are ignored, negatively labeled, and pushed out of the educational system. And it kind of goes on and talk about school inequalities, but I think that highlights what you said as well.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really that the thing is, how do we bridge the gap? That's to me
the question of the book.
that's the question. You have the achievement gap, and like you said, schools, and we have Common Core, we have all of these different standards, and all of the different conferences, all of the different PLC trainings. This one has a different take on how we can do it, and sometimes I feel with regards to that, it just seems like we're going in circles. Where we're not, hitting the core of what the issues are, or perhaps
we're having trouble finding the core because we keep finding, oh, well, it's linked to this, and then it's linked to this, and then it's linked to this. And so you just keep digging into another hole kind of situation.
Right, exactly. And and when we think we've identified a problem, something else comes up, and it's like, what do we do?
Yeah.
But I'm looking at page 128 where it talks to, and then and before I even say that, we've been reading up about democracy and so forth, and sometimes while it is kind of set, kind of like it's more towards the letter of the law, but in practice, or theory rather, I should say, generally it's in theory. We think about these things, and school leaders, they talk about what it is that should be done, but in actuality, are we really being engaging in a democratic action when it comes to ensuring the the same type of equal opportunities for individuals? Because we saw with the New York City school system and Chancellor Klein, and his perspective, and what he felt with certain things, and we even saw it with even with the situation, the Lawndale schools, with Dr. Stovall and in Chicago and so forth. But we have to, that is something that has to be considered, everyone, has rights, and are we impeding on the rights of the individuals by kind of stifling the avenues, right, whereby opportunities can be gained or can be achieved.
Yeah.
That's the key thing. But anyways, this particular quote, democratic theorists, on the other hand, would privilege our national collective responsibility for ensuring that all schools are of high quality, having diverse student bodies, are given resources equitably, and achieve academic results that are substantially independent of the socioeconomic differences between students. And this was on page 128. So this is what the theorists they're talking about. Privilege our national collective responsibility, to ensure that all schools are of high quality. That's the focus. That's the goal. That's the ideal, actually, have diverse student bodies. Everybody is, given, an equal opportunity and achieve, the same kinds of success. So that's when you speak of democracy and so forth, equality, increasing opportunities, working on giving, people from marginalized communities an opportunity to sit on the planning boards, to sit on, to have a say. So even with the testing, we're talking about testing, high stakes testing, and so forth. Let's talk about how we can engage in making or creating tests that are free. I don't know if there's such a bias-free test, but when we're dealing with individuals from different various cultures, there are things that we have to consider in even constructing these tests. And there's definitely lots of research out there on tests, that high stake tests in, things that are biased. So that's our task is definitely great.
Yeah. I think that when you were talking about kind of politicians, I think one of the points, I can't tell you which chapter it was in, but it was one of the authors was touching on that, politicians need to stop using euphemism for describing the gaps and just talk about it for what it is. And I think that also tied into a large issue that was highlighted, especially in chapter 4, of like how very closely linked it is to the housing, just housing and kind of where location is. And I know we've touched about that on other modules, but I think chapter 4 really kind of, delves into that, of talking about, how where you live really determines about where, what the kind of opportunities you're going to have, what kind of schooling you're going to have, and how a lot of the systematic, legislation over the years has created, resegregation in, in communities, and talked about just how just the little things that I, could identify, but didn't always think about, of just like, oh, well, when you're in, a community with a lot more apartments and, rental communities, obviously that makes it more transient. So you're not going to have students staying as long. So they're not going to have that continuity that another child would have, where they're going through the same school districts from, kindergarten and all the way up till 12th grade. And it just made me think of, even just on Friday, I got an email, because I work with special ed students who are mostly nonverbal or, really impacted in their speech and language. And so they use devices to communicate. And we had one child, he's in a general education first grade class. He does come from a Spanish speaking family. He just moved from a different county nearby, before that was in Florida, but he came to this school and the team just kind of really, really got into action. They're not really even familiar because they don't have a special ed program, but they really just got in action and really started making really great things for him. And then I just got an email last Friday that he is going to be moving to another elementary school. So now all of that supports those sports that were built. And yes, it's in the same county, the same district, but it's like now we're going to probably have to start all over again because, he's just not your typical student. It's not, that's more barriers for him. So that was just an example of how it can just change in a minute when you have more transient kind of population.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And so, you're looking at stability in a situation like that, especially when they're moving around. They may have received certain opportunities, certain school or certain district, but now they've got to move because of the nature of the situation. And then what happens, and that's kind of unfortunate. They may have been at a place where things were going to be moving right along with regards to the opportunities and even perhaps the achievement.
He was making a lot of gains, and I hope he still does, but we'll see.
Right, exactly.
Start next week, so we'll see.
Oh my goodness, yeah. There is, since I was talking about the testing factor on page 133, the emphasis on testing has created, so that's another component to all of this. Planning, the emphasis on testing has created an environment in which diverse schools, diversity, and in particular schools comprising primarily poor students and other students of color are seen as less desirable. Interesting now by those parents with the most choices.
Yeah. I would say not surprising to me. I mean, it even goes hand in hand with the whole white flight theory because, I see it a lot in DC. I live right outside of DC and neighborhoods. DC is called Chocolate City, but now it's officially, I believe that more white than African Americans. But there's still a very high population. I think it just moved over that 50% mark, but the schools still are very much full of children of color. So I think, again, it goes to the housing, but the communities move in, but they still don't want their kids in those schools. So.
Right. Kind of, reminds me of some of the parents with regards to, I think it was District Q in New York City. We have parents, personally support the schools that are diverse, but when it comes
down to it.
Yes, the bottom line. The bottom line, what is best for their son or daughter, they default back, right? Really, they default back, even though their intention
that integration is important. They acknowledge that, there are benefits to it, but when you have to make that final decision, we know what happens.
Right. And the other thing too, the trickle when we talk about the economic side of things too, some of the things that I saw, with regards to opportunity, it even went back to, the housing situation where on page 28, where individuals of color were denied a federal mortgage.
Yeah.
In other words, the mortgage was restricted to, to only whites. And the only reason I'm saying this is because the book also talks about the economic, kind of like a generational situation where, if it's not fixed, if that lack or that poverty is not interrupted early along, it just seems to carry on over, and it spills on over. And so something has to, in my opinion, something has to interrupt it.
Yeah, has to break the cycle. Yeah.
Yes, something has to definitely to interrupt it in order to create that change with regards to that.
I think we might be near our time. I'm not sure.
Oh, I was going to. I'm sorry. Let's take a look and see here.
I just wanted to conclude with this. I think that the book also emphasized the importance of that. You know, this is not just about that we need to fix this for communities of color and for those in poverty, that it's a societal problem and it affects everyone, not just those people. So it's something that needs to be addressed and continues to need.
Exactly. Yes. And the trickle down effect is that, like you said, it affects everyone because, you know, I like to look at things from the perspective of the human component. You know, what do humans feel? We all share the same feelings. We all share the same emotions. So I don't, not to sound too touchy emotional, but that's just my world. That's how I kind of view things.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, and hope everybody enjoys this, and let us know if you have any questions or need any clarification. Good night, Christina.
Good night.
Bye bye.